Alaskans, wherever you are, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. I hope everybody's having a phenomenal day today. I want to thank everybody that listens, watches, and reads Must Read Alaska. If you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. We have a very special guest today, Mark, who is the co-inventor of the star voting method. He is also a fellow entrepreneur. He's done a number of different cool things in his life. We're going to have a chance to talk about that today. But without further ado, Mark, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show.
Hey, John, thank you for having me on the program. Hello from Oregon.
Well, this will be fun to chat with you, hear your story a little bit and why you're so passionate about voting. But first, take me back to, you've had several successful entrepreneur ventures. What first got you that entrepreneur bug? Everybody's got their story. What's yours?
I actually never originally thought of entrepreneurship as a path for me. It was only when so I was in the computer games business for a long time, and Jeff Tennell, who was one of the founders of Dynamics, kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I've got this new idea about basically democratizing game technology for independent game makers." And it was kind of in that moment that I realized that entrepreneurship can be like a vehicle for change, if that makes sense. That there's some changes in the world that are best accomplished through, public movements of people or protest or whatever. But there are other things like, when you're thinking about a product that has a mission, or a technology that has a mission, then the build a company route is actually the most effective way to make that change. So, accidental entrepreneur.
Nice. Well, what's give me one favorite moment from your early on entrepreneur days.
Well, I think from the cool thing about starting your own thing is you can kind of go like, what's the missing piece out there in the world that I want to play or that I want to drive or whatever. There have been a lot of really interesting high points. There have been also a ton of challenges, but if I had to pick one, I think probably launching the 8th generation Arcimoto was like, after 7 years of grinding away, finally coming up with something that matched what we had been going for. So there was a lot of kind of completion in that.
That's awesome. Well, folks listening in, go check out Arcimoto. It's pretty cool. It's an electric vehicle company, and it's fascinating stuff. You were on the front end of a lot of that. So you took that experience and you opened up shop a couple of kind of political type companies. One is the Star Voting, the other one is the Equal Vote Coalition. Talk to me a little bit about the Equal Vote Coalition and why you started it.
Well, so yeah, democracy has been a hobby of mine for a long time. I was born into my dad's first political campaign. So like some of my very first memories are of peering over the edge of the crib and seeing turf maps that people were going to go canvass. And he ran for governor of Oregon in 1990. And this is, I was in high school. There was a third party kind of intentional spoiler. Like they sort of came to him and said, "Hey, if you don't do these things that we want you to do, we're going to run a spoiler against you, make sure you lose." And so that was kind of my first experience with wait, I was told there would be democracy. And the way that we do things, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, well, this is fair, right? And then all of a sudden you get like this very up close personal thing of, wow, this is really not fair. It's like manipulated, and the majority didn't win. It was sort of like this very gamed outcome. And that was, I think really what kind of set me on that quest way back in the day. And then, spent 21 years just like not knowing how to fix it. Right. And, saw Kiesling here in Oregon did the open primary in, petitioned that in 2008. There were other groups that were doing ranked choice voting, but all of those systems had real math problems. And so it wasn't until 2011 that I was like, oh, if you basically do like an open primary concept, but use approval voting in the front end, it solves the vote splitting issue with the current choose one method. And then it was sort of a question of, well, so kind of took the open primary, made some legal tweaks to add approval voting. And then I was like, well, what's going to get anybody to care enough to, get nerdy on voting reform? And, federal government shut down in September of 2013. And that's when I was like, okay, here's like this 3-week window of time when people might actually care. And that's when I submitted that measure to the Oregon Secretary of State. And that kind of began this whole process of, figuring out who's who in the political landscape and who wanted to help and who really didn't want it to happen. And ended up, falling well short of the requirement to get the unified primary on the statewide ballot. And it was in that moment of, when you run a proposal, right, you get tons of feedback, people ask questions, you start to really hone in on what are the real questions around this, and one that kind of kept coming up was the idea of one person, one vote, right? This is a concept that predates the founding of the country, that we're all to be sort of equal in the vote of our representatives. And coming to realize that there is this baked in inequality in how we vote now. I mean, this was kind of like the aha of 2014 for me, was like, in any election where there are two candidates, the choice of one is equal, right? You vote for A, I vote for B. We know that we have an equal weight vote because when you add our two votes in, neither candidate gains an advantage, right? We balance each other out. But anytime there's a third candidate in the race, every time there's a third or more, then the voters who like multiple candidates are at a disadvantage to the voters who like just one, right? So the more similar candidates divide support. You familiar with this concept, right? Yeah. The spoiler effect, vote splitting, don't waste your vote the lesser evil. But in that moment of not getting the unified primary on the ballot, it was like the realization that we like the real argument against plurality voting to me is it's mathematically demonstrably not equal amongst the voters, right? Like anytime there are more than two candidates, then it's not a fair system. And that's the goal of voting method reform, is to get to a fair system, right? So the advocates of ranked choice and approval voting and so on, it is to a more getting to a more representative, more equal type of a world. And it was against that. So that, unified primary basically pivoted and became the Equal Vote Coalition. I mean, it was initially a coalition of one. But during that year, we helped organize a conference called the Equal Vote Conference. And this is right before Oregon voted on ballot measure 90, which was a kind of a rerun of the open primary. And we had, it was like kind of a who's who of the national election and voting reform folks came out to Oregon, came out to Eugene, and debated for a day at the University of Oregon Law School. And, we had Rob Ritchie, the founder of Fair Vote, debating Aaron Hamlin, the founder of the Center of Election Science, and just kind of all through. And at the end of that day, Rob Ritchie pulled me aside and said, hey, we've been kind of tangling online. What if we kind of collaborated on an idea? And what he put forward was, instead of like a 2-election unified primary process, if you had one ballot and the voter could approve and rank candidates on the same ballot, then you could run a first approval step and then a runoff using the rankings. And I sort of like, nodded and smiled, and I was like, well, that's going to be a really weird ballot, and that's asking like voters aren't going to go for that. But very shortly thereafter, realized that a score ballot, like a star ballot, actually conveys both a level of support. How many stars did you give this candidate, and your preference order between the candidates on the ballot. And so normal score voting doesn't use that preference data. The aha of Star was to just say, hey, let's take Rob Ritchie's idea of a compromise between approval and ranked choice voting and use a star ballot to, the 0 to 5 star thing that everybody is like, it's ubiquitous in our culture today. So it would have the advantage of being a very familiar kind of user interface for the voter. And then, so this is like, close to the end of 2014. And then the past decade has been validate it in every way we possibly can, learn how to talk about it, figure out what are the concerns, figure out, what are the ways to potentially game it, and are those viable? And just it's also been a time of where a lot of really sharp and passionate people have kind of come out of the woodwork to say, I want to help make this real.
Nice. So talk to me a little bit about in Alaska. We were talking a little bit before we jumped on here that we have ranked choice voting here in Alaska. I'm not a huge fan of ranked choice voting, but Scott Kendall is regularly on the show, and I think it's important to hear other people's opinions. But talk to me a little bit about why you think maybe ranked choice voting falls short of where star voting maybe is able to.
I kind of started out as a ranked choice instant runoff fan, and until I learned that it doesn't have a good counting system, right? I mean, the issue with ranked choice is not that you get to rank candidates. I mean, that's being able to rank candidates is much better than just having to choose one. The issue with that particular method is the way it's tabulated is just it's an arcane and very broken counting system. And the reason why, and you guys actually experienced this on the first time it was used in Alaska, right, is that because of the way it eliminates candidates, then in any election with ranked choice where you have 3 viable candidates, one of those, one will get knocked out. And so of the other 2 sort of set of voter supporters, one will have their secondary preferences counted and the other group won't. Right. So it's like the system people know as ranked choice allows you to express your preferences, but then it goes and like discards randomly some of the voters' secondary preferences, but counts others. And then you get these really weird election results. And it's not particularly predictable, but it's just a bad feature of a voting system. So Star was really created to kind of, in some sense, to deliver on the goals that ranked choice advocates have had for a long time, right? Which is a system where you can vote your conscience, a system that's fair, a system that's demonstrably equal amongst the voters. And kind of the other piece of this is that just having that, I'm assuming you've seen ranked choice election results now that you've had elections with it, right? Just looking at kind of like what happened in this election can be, it can be a giant chart of sort of the waterfall knockouts, and it's just really hard for kind of a lay voter to go, do I understand what really happened in this thing? So having a counting system that can be summed by precinct and that is very clear to kind of communicate the results of the election, that's another area where we think Star really shines.
So where is Star voting at in like today's current climate? Do you guys have Star voting approved in Oregon?
Well, funny you should ask. We just had the vote last night in Eugene.
Oh, wow.
And Star did not prevail in the adoption for Eugene City Council and mayor offices. There was an opposition campaign that had dumped a lot of money and some very inaccurate mailers on Eugene voters. It's kind of a big fear, uncertainty, doubt campaign. And they were successful in getting folks to shy away from it this time. The odd part is that the opposition campaign is actually the pro ranked choice statewide campaign folks up in Portland. So I think today is a day of sort of post-mortem on the process, and then figure out with the team, well, what did we learn, what can we do better, and what's the next step.
This is a kind of a super hypothetical question that is, just curious to get your thoughts. Do you think had Alaska had star voting instead of ranked choice voting, do you think Mary Patola still wins in that election?
I mean, star is almost always going to elect the Condorcet winner in an election, right? It does a really good job of picking the most representative candidate in the field. And there's a site called rcvchangedalaska.com. I don't know if you've seen that, but it really breaks down sort of fully what happened in that election and where the system went sideways. But
sorry, I mean to interrupt you there. Keep going,
called
Mark.
rcvchangedalaska.com. But it really it kind of visually walks through what is a fairly technical topic. So I guess for me, like having a voting system that is much more accurate, easier to count, more expressive for the voter and so on, like we need those models out there in the world so that when an RCV election in Alaska goes sideways, that the first response isn't like, okay, well, now we've got to repeal that. Instead, it's like, well, hey, there's an upgrade path. And that to me is one of the other reasons I'm just really fired up about Star, is like it checks all the boxes, but it's got to get adopted somewhere so that everywhere else can say, well, yeah, they've adopted it already. It's in use. Like,
so
we're at a time in this country where we need real models that work. And so, that's why we keep chopping away at it day by day.
Nice. So walk me through what somebody's ballot looks like, because I think that for folks to get a practical sense on what this is, I think is going to be helpful. So walk me through what it looks like. Let's say if there's, 2 or 3 candidates on there, what somebody would look at if they have a star voting ballot, and what are their options once they get that ballot. You've kind of talked a little bit about it, the 5-star stuff, but, talk to me about what that practically looks like, and what their, how their voting works if somebody's got a 1-star compared to a 5-star.
So, and can I share my screen here, or do you have the ability to do kind of graphic overlays and stuff?
Might be able to.
But if you go to starvoting.org/star.
Okay, you can share it now.
Okay.
Should be able to.
So this is is that coming through?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a star voting ballot sample. And you basically have a 0 to 5-star scale for all the candidates on the ballot. You can independently score them however you like, right? So you can give equal scores to multiple candidates. If you leave it blank, it counts as a 0. And then you're instructed to give your favorite or favorites 5 stars, give your last choice or least favorites 0, score the rest as you like. And the winner is the majority favorite between the 2 who get the most stars overall. So that's star is score, then automatic runoff. It's those are it's the whole system is kind of those 4 words. But you add up all the stars, the 2 who got the most are the finalists, and then your vote goes to whichever of those 2 you gave a higher score, or it's counted as a vote of equal preference if you gave them the same score. So star is the thing I really like about it is it is your overall support makes a big difference, because that's who advances to the automatic runoff. And then even if you just gave 1 point more, like a 1 versus a 0 or a 5 versus a 4, your full preference vote goes to whichever of those two finalists you gave more points. And it lets you be very expressive about the outcome if you want to be. And if you want to vote just like you do today, you can say, you know, I'm only voting for Bob. Or you can say, I want anybody but Bob, and give all the other candidates 5 and Bob 0. So
somebody could potentially get on here and say, I only want Blake. I'm going to give him a 5. I don't like anybody else. I hate ranking anything, and I'm not going to put any stars on anybody else's names. They could potentially do that as well.
well, and it's that feature that actually is what makes it an equal vote, right? That no matter how you fill in your ballot, there's a way that I can fill it out that balances yours out, right? So whereas like a choose only one system, there's no way to balance it if there are more than 2 candidates. This lets you have an equal say regardless of how many are in the race.
So what's next for star voting? It sounds like you guys have to kind of go back to the drawing board and find a local place to potentially, Peachtree this.
There are actually chapters that have spun up in a number of different locales around the country already. So there's I think one down in Southern California, there's one in Ohio, Massachusetts. So there are multiple efforts kind of happening in parallel. But I think the question is going to be, particularly for Eugene and for Oregon, where we're headquartered, is like, what's the next move? And is it running again here in the local area? Is it, I think there's going to be a lot of parsing of the tea leaves about like what happened on this vote. Was it, oppo mailers, or was it the differential in turnout in the primary versus a general? I think it's still early to hypothesize fully.
Yeah. So what keeps you going? Because, David versus Goliath, ranked choice voting seems to be extremely well funded. It's got to be maybe tough or frustrating at times to see things like this and then, not prevail. So what keeps you going at the end of the day? What makes you get up, put your, get your coffee, keep fighting, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think just the magnitude and importance of the problem and challenge, right? That it's this, when you start thinking about our national political problem of being in this hyper divided, kind of special interest dominated political landscape all over the place, I think we persist at that, at our peril. I think it is getting that wedge is kind of growing. It appears. So, to me, the real, we need to fix this thing that has been a bug in how we do this since the beginning of the country. And so I guess I have some measure of like, big changes take time, right? Like ranked choice voting is a 150-year-old system, and it's finally getting a little bit of legs, 150 years later for statewide. Approval voting has been around since the 70s, and it got its first election like 45 years later. So stars like definitely the new kid on the block. And the speed at which, it has built momentum and enthusiasm, I think really speaks to its potential as a reform. But definitely, like, getting it into the world, that's going 0 to 1 is a critical step that we still need to do. So I think but particularly for Alaska, it's like, hey, again, like the idea of ranked choice, like the reasons why Alaskans wanted it are generally good ones, but it's just I think it's regularly oversold. And then when it breaks, you're like, wait, that didn't work,
Oh crap. Okay.
So
what's the warranty on this thing? It's not working right.
yeah, get it in for repairs. It's called star voting. Come on, Alaska. You can be the first state.
So talk to me a little bit about, there's going to be people that listen to this, even outside of Alaska, a lot of our listeners are folks who maybe lived in Alaska for a little bit, or maybe they're, obsessed with Alaska because they watch all the Alaska reality shows, and we kind of glean off some of that. So all of our listeners, they're all over the globe. Let's say if somebody was interested, they live in North Dakota or whatever it is, some small town in Iowa, and they want to find out more about Star Voting. Tell me the easiest way for them to kind of track you all down and hear more about it.
Yeah, that website I had up, starvoting.org, is a great place to start. It fully explains the system and also lets you sign up to volunteer. And we've got people really from all around the country working on this topic in their own locales, and so there's kind of like a good nexus point for sharing, learning about the system, and for finding other folks in your area that might be interested in starting something new.
Nice. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you joining us. Our time has kind of gone by in a flash here. Do you have any last minute thoughts before we head off? The floor is yours.
Well, hey, again, really appreciate you having me on the program, and really appreciate you, helping to educate. I mean, this is a very nuanced field, and so I think the real trick here is educating on what the opportunities are. So really appreciate you having me, and I'll be curious to see how Alaskan election reformers move in this cycle and beyond. I think, to me, it's not just about stepping back and repeal. It's like, okay, well, what really solves the problem? And that's certainly where I'm going to put my energy.
Nice. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you joining us here on the Must Read Alaska show. For folks interested in hearing more, I'll put all the links in the podcast description. Go check it out. And for folks that watch, listen, or read Must Read Alaska, we want to thank you for doing that. If you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. And if you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, JOHN, at mustreadalaska.com. We hope everybody has a phenomenal week. We hope the sun is going to finally come out. I'm looking out my window and I see gloomy rain clouds. So, man, it's got to get sunny by June because we're going camping in my family. So, Mark, again, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska.